The scorching New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly as Daniel Harlow discovered her. An Apache woman collapsed in the dust, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't live without a man." But this wasn't what it seemed. Behind those desperate words lay a story of survival, betrayal, and the fierce battle for freedom that would transform two broken souls forever. Stay with me until the end of this incredible journey, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The desert had no mercy, and Daniel Harlow had learned not to expect any. 3 years of working this godforsaken patch of New Mexico territory had taught him that much. The sun hammered down like the wrath of an angry god, turning the earth to dust, and the horizon into a shimmering mirage of false promises. His cattle grazed on parse grass that crackled underfoot, and the wind carried nothing but the scent of sage and the distant threat of another drought. Daniel wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as he rode the fence line, checking for breaks in the barbed wire that kept his small herd from wandering into the endless expanse. At 35, he looked older. Grief had a way of aging a man faster than the sun. The lines around his green eyes spoke of sleepless nights and the weight of memories he couldn't shake. His wife Sarah's laughter still echoed in the empty rooms of their ranch house, 3 years cold in the ground, but alive as ever in his mind. The horse beneath him, a sturdy bay mare named Cassie, suddenly pricked her ears forward and snorted nervously. Daniel's hand instinctively moved to the rifle in his saddle holster. Out here, caution wasn't just wise, it was survival. Apache raids had been less frequent lately, but the territory was still wild, still dangerous. Cattle rustlers, drifters, and worse haunted these lands. "Easy, girl," he murmured, scanning the scrubland ahead. That's when he saw her. A figure lay crumpled beside a cluster of prickly pear cactus, dark hair spilling across the red earth like spilled ink. For a moment, Daniel thought it might be a mirage. The desert played tricks on a man's eyes. But Cassie's continued agitation told him otherwise. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the hardpan as he approached. The figure was a woman, young by the look of her, wearing a torn doeskin dress that had once been beautiful but now hung in tatters. Her bronze skin was burned by the sun, and her lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. "Ma'am," Daniel called softly, not wanting to startle her if she was conscious. The woman's eyes fluttered open, dark as midnight, and filled with a desperation that hit Daniel like a physical blow. She tried to sit up, her movements weak and unsteady. "Please," she whispered, her voice like sand scraping against stone. I can't live without a man." The words stopped Daniel cold. In his 3 years of solitude, he'd grown suspicious of everyone, especially strangers who appeared out of nowhere with convenient sob stories. But there was something in her voice, something beyond mere desperation, a kind of broken honesty that made his chest tighten. "You're Apache," he said, not accusingly, but as a statement of fact. Her features, her dress, even the intricate beadwork visible beneath the dirt and damage, everything marked her as one of the people who had been fighting the white settlers for decades. She nodded, struggling to focus on his face. "Ahyoka," she managed. "My name, Ahyoka." "I'm Daniel Harlow." He crouched down beside her, close enough to see the purple bruises around her wrists, the rope burns on her ankles. Someone had held this woman against her will, and recently. "Who did this to you?" Ahyoka's eyes darted nervously, as if expecting attackers to emerge from behind every cactus. "Men came to our camp, took me, sold me." Her English was accented but clear. Someone had taught her well. "I ran 3 days. No water." Daniel felt his jaw clench. Human trafficking wasn't uncommon in the territory where Apache women and children were often captured and sold to brothels or as domestic slaves. The practice sickened him, but it was a reality of frontier life that most folks preferred to ignore. "The men who took you, where are they now?" "I don't know." Ahyoka tried again to sit up this time, managing to prop herself against the base of the cactus. I think they stopped looking. Too far from their territory now. Daniel studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but all he saw was exhaustion, fear, and something else, a core of strength that hadn't been broken despite whatever hell she'd endured. The bruises told a story he didn't want to imagine, but her eyes told a different one. This woman was a survivor. Why did you say that? He asked. About not being able to live without a man. A flush of shame colored her cheeks. In the white man's world, a woman alone, she has nothing, no protection, no food, no place to sleep that is safe. She looked down at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I thought, if I could find a kind man, maybe he would let me work for food, for safety. The honesty in her words hit Daniel harder than he'd expected. How long had it been since someone had spoken to him with such raw truth? Most folks in town walked on eggshells around him, treating him like a wounded animal that might bite if approached too quickly. Can you ride? He asked. Ahyoka's eyes widened with surprise and hope. Yes, but I have no horse. You can ride with me. My ranch isn't far. Daniel stood and extended his hand to help her up. But I want you to understand something. I'm not looking for a wife, a servant, or anything else. I'll give you food and water, maybe let you rest up for a few days, but then you'll need to move on. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The moment he'd seen the rope burns on her wrists, Daniel had known he couldn't just send her back out into the desert. But he needed to maintain some distance, some control over the situation. 3 years of isolation had made him wary of human connection. Ahyoka took his hand, her skin hot and dry as leather. She was lighter than he'd expected as he helped her to her feet, malnutrition evident in her thinness. For a moment she swayed against him, and he caught the scent of sage and musk in her hair. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel Harlow is a good name, a strong name. Something in the way she said it made his chest tighten again. Don't thank me yet, you don't know me. I know enough. Ahyoka looked up at him with those midnight eyes. You could have left me to die. You could have taken advantage. Instead, you offer help with no promise of reward. That tells me who you are. Daniel helped her onto Cassie, settling her behind the saddle before mounting himself. The horse seemed to sense the additional burden, but made no protest as they started toward the ranch. Ahyoka's arms went around his waist for balance, and Daniel tried to ignore the way her touch sent an unexpected warmth through him. The ride back to the ranch took 20 minutes, but it felt longer with Ahyoka's silent presence behind him. She didn't speak, but he could feel her eyes taking in everything, the condition of his fences, the health of his cattle, the layout of his land. Apache warriors were taught to observe, to catalog potential threats and advantages. Apparently, Apache women were too. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill, a modest adobe structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Sarah had loved this place, had spent hours planning where to plant flowers and vegetables. Now it looked exactly like what it was, the home of a man who'd given up on hope. It's beautiful, Ahyoka said softly, the first words she'd spoken during the ride. Daniel snorted. It's falling apart. No. Her arms tightened slightly around his waist. It's waiting, like sleeping bear in winter, just needs reason to wake up. The poetry in her words caught him off guard. He'd expected fear, gratitude, maybe calculation. He hadn't expected this quiet wisdom that seemed to see through the surface of things to something deeper. They reached the house as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel helped Ahyoka down from the horse, noting how she immediately stepped back to give him space. She wasn't taking his kindness for granted, another mark in her favor. Come inside, he said, leading Cassie to the small barn behind the house. I'll get you some water and food, then show you where you can sleep. The interior of the house was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a simple wooden table and chairs in the center. The kitchen was basic, a wood-burning stove, a few cabinets, a hand pump for water, everything a bachelor rancher needed and nothing more. Ahyoka stood in the doorway, taking it all in. "You live here alone, for 3 years now." Daniel worked the pump handle, filling a tin cup with cool water from the well. "My wife died. Fever took her." He handed her the cup, watching as she drank greedily, but controlled, not allowing herself to take too much too fast. Smart woman, drinking too much water too quickly after severe dehydration could be dangerous. "I'm sorry," she said when she'd finished half the cup. "It's hard to lose someone you love." "Yeah." Daniel turned away, busying himself with lighting the stove. "It is." He could feel her watching him as he prepared a simple meal, beans and hardtack, not much but filling. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was charged with unspoken questions and possibilities. "Why did you really help me?" Ahyoka asked as he set a plate before her. Daniel sat across the table with his own meal. "Honest answer, I don't know. Maybe because I know what it's like to feel alone in the world." "Alone is different from abandoned," she said, taking a careful bite of beans. "You chose your alone. Mine was chosen for me." "You want to tell me about it?" Ahyoka was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her food. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant, as if she were recounting someone else's story. "My village was small, peaceful. We had made treaty with the soldiers, agreed to stay in our territory, but some white men, they don't care about treaties." She took another bite, chewing slowly. "They came at dawn, killed the old ones, the men who might fight, took the young women to sell, the children too." Daniel's appetite disappeared. "How many?" "7 women, 4 children." Ahyoka's hands tightened around her fork. "They kept us chained in a wagon for weeks, moving from town to town, selling us one by one. I was saved for last. They said I would bring the highest price because I speak English well." "Where did you learn English?" "Mission school when I was very young, before my family took me back to live with our people." She looked up at him. "I was lucky. The night before they planned to sell me, the wagon guard drank too much whiskey. I cut my ropes with a broken piece of metal and ran." The simple way she told it made the horror worse somehow. No dramatics, no self-pity, just the facts of a nightmare that had become her reality. "The other women?" Daniel asked. "I don't know." Pain flickered across her features. "I pray they found a way to escape too, but..." She didn't need to finish. They both knew the likely fate of the others. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, and meant it. "No one should have to endure that." "But I did endure it." Ahyoka met his eyes. "I survived. And now I'm here eating your food at your table. Sometimes enduring is enough." After dinner, Daniel showed her to the spare room, Sarah's sewing room, though he didn't mention that. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the desert. He brought her a basin of water for washing and a clean shirt of his that would serve as a nightgown. "The door locks from the inside," he said, demonstrating the simple latch. "You're safe here." Ahyoka nodded, but he saw how her eyes automatically catalogued the window, the distance to the floor, potential escape routes. Trust would take time. "Daniel Harlow," she said as he turned to leave. "Yeah. Thank you, not just for food and shelter, for seeing me as a person, not just broken thing to be pitied or used." The words followed him back to his own room, where he lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling. For 3 years he'd existed in a bubble of grief and routine, barely interacting with the outside world, except when necessity demanded it. Now, suddenly, there was another heartbeat in his house, another set of lungs drawing breath in the darkness. It terrified him. The next morning, Daniel woke before dawn, as always. The sounds from the kitchen told him Ahyoka was already awake, the soft clatter of dishes, the creak of the pump handle. He found her fully dressed, his oversized shirt tucked into her torn skirt, attempting to start a fire in the stove. "You don't need to do that," he said. She looked up at him, a streak of ash across one cheek. I need to earn my keep. You said a few days. I want to be useful while I'm here. Ahyoka. He moved to the stove, gently taking the matches from her hands. You're healing from trauma. You don't need to earn anything. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm. I won't be charity case. I work or I leave now. The determination in her tone reminded him of Sarah, who'd had her own stubborn streak a mile wide. It was surprisingly comforting. Fine, he said, but we start easy. Help me with breakfast, then we'll see what you can handle. They worked together in companionable silence, preparing eggs from his small flock of chickens and thick slices of bread. Ahyoka moved efficiently, despite her obvious exhaustion, her hands quick and sure. She'd been responsible for cooking before, probably for her entire family. After breakfast, Daniel gave her a tour of the ranch. It wasn't much. 40 acres of grazing land, a small barn, a chicken coop, and a vegetable garden that had been sadly neglected since Sarah's death. But as they walked, he found himself seeing it through Ahyoka's eyes. Your cattle look healthy, she observed, watching the small herd graze near the creek that ran along the eastern boundary of his property. They're hardy stock, have to be out here. Daniel leaned against the fence, surprised to find himself enjoying the conversation. Originally planned to expand the herd, but then you were alone and there seemed no point in planning for the future. Her understanding caught him off guard. Something like that. Ahyoka studied the land with the same intense focus she'd shown the night before. This is good earth, good water, with more cattle, better management of the grazing. She paused, glancing at him. Forgive me, I speak too freely. No, go on. What would you do? Rotate the cattle between different sections, let the grass recover, build better shelter for winter, plant crops that feed both cattle and people. Her eyes brightened as she spoke the first real animation he'd seen from her. My people, we know the land. We know how to work with it instead of against it. Daniel found himself genuinely interested in her ideas. The Apache are farmers. Some, not all white people understand we are not just warriors. We grow corn, beans, squash. We know which plants heal and which harm. We know how to read the sky for weather, the ground for water. She touched the fence post, testing its stability. Your ranch could support 3 times as many cattle with right management, and you know how to do that. Some of it. I would need to learn the rest. Ahyoka looked at him directly, but I learn quickly. They spent the rest of the morning working together, checking fences, feeding the chickens, tending the few vegetables that hadn't completely died from neglect. Daniel was amazed at how naturally Ahyoka fit into the rhythm of ranch work. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't need constant direction. She simply observed, learned, and contributed. It was during lunch that the trouble started. They were sitting on the porch eating bread and cheese in the shade when Daniel spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. 3 riders moving fast and purposeful. His blood chilled as he recognized the lead horse, a distinctive pinto that belonged to Jake Morrison, one of the worst human beings to ever draw breath in New Mexico territory. Get inside, Daniel said quietly, standing and moving toward the door. Ahyoka followed his gaze and went rigid. I know that horse. Morrison. He was one of them, one of the men who took us. Her voice was barely a whisper. They found me. Daniel's mind raced. Morrison was a slaver, a brutal man who operated just outside the law by claiming he was recovering stolen property or collecting bounties. He had connections with corrupt officials who turned a blind eye to his activities in exchange for a cut of the profits. How did they track you here? I don't know, maybe they asked in town, or... Ahyoka's face went pale. The old Apache man who sells horses near the settlement. If they showed him my description, offered money. Doesn't matter now. Daniel was already moving, checking his rifle, making sure his sidearm was loaded. Go to the bedroom, lock the door. If something happens to me, there's a horse in the barn. No. Ahyoka's voice was steel. I won't hide while you face danger because of me. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you decided to help me." She moved to the cabinet where Daniel kept his spare ammunition. "Do you have another rifle?" "Ahyoka, these men are killers. They won't hesitate to kill me." She turned to face him, and he saw something fierce and unbroken burning in her dark eyes. "They already tried. I'm still here." The riders were close enough now that Daniel could make out Morrison's scarred face and cold smile. Behind him rode two men Daniel didn't recognize, hard cases, by the look of them the kind who'd kill for the price of a bottle of whiskey. "Jake Morrison," Daniel called out as the three men rode into his yard. "You're not welcome here." Morrison dismounted with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never met consequences for his actions. He was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. A long scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from an Apache warrior who'd nearly succeeded in ending Morrison's career permanently. "Now that's no way to greet old friends, Harlow." Morrison's voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Especially when we're here on official business." "What business?" "Recovery of stolen property." Morrison nodded toward the house where Ahyoka stood in the doorway, despite Daniel's instructions. "That Apache girl there ran off from her lawful owners. We're here to bring her back." "She's not property," Daniel said evenly. "She's a human being." "Well, now that's a matter of some debate." Morrison pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Got myself a legitimate recovery warrant here, signed by Judge Harrison himself. Says I'm authorized to retrieve one escaped Apache female, about 20 years old, goes by the name of Ahyoka." Daniel's heart sank. Judge Harrison was as corrupt as they came, but his warrants were still legal documents. Morrison was covering his bases, making sure he could claim legitimate authority if anyone questioned his actions. "Let me see that warrant." "Sure thing." Morrison handed over the paper with a mocking smile. "Though I don't reckon it matters much what you think about it." The warrant was real, Daniel realized as he scanned the legal language. Cleverly worded to make it sound like Ahyoka was an escaped criminal rather than a kidnapping victim. Harrison had probably been paid handsomely for his cooperation. "This warrant is based on false information," Daniel said, handing it back. "She wasn't stolen property, she was kidnapped from her own people." "That's mighty interesting," Morrison said, "but the law says otherwise. Now I've been real patient here, Harlow, but my patience ain't infinite. Send the girl out and we'll be on our way." "No." The word hung in the air like the calm before a thunderstorm. Morrison's two companions shifted in their saddles' hands, moving closer to their weapons. Daniel was acutely aware that he was outnumbered and outgunned, but he'd made his choice the moment he'd helped Ahyoka onto his horse. "That's disappointing," Morrison said. "I was hoping we could handle this civilized-like, but if you want to make this difficult, the only thing difficult here is you being on my land without permission." Daniel's voice stayed calm, but his hand rested on the butt of his pistol. "I'm asking you to leave." "Can't do that, friend. Got a job to finish." Morrison turned toward the house. "Ahyoka girl, you come on out here now. No need for anyone to get hurt over this." Ahyoka stepped fully onto the porch, her chin raised defiantly. "I am not your property, Jake Morrison. I am not anyone's property." "Well, the law says different, and I'm a law-abiding citizen." Morrison's smile never wavered. "You can come peaceful, or we can do this the hard way. Either suits me fine." "She's not going anywhere," Daniel said. Morrison's facade of civility finally cracked. "You know what, Harlow? I'm getting real tired of your mouth. Maybe it's time someone taught you some manners." The slaver's hand moved toward his gun, but Daniel was faster. His Colt was out and aimed before Morrison could clear leather, the distinctive click of the hammer being cocked unnaturally loud in the desert air. "I wouldn't," Daniel said quietly. Morrison froze his gun half-drawn. His two companions had their weapons out, but Daniel's position on the porch gave him good cover and clear lines of sight. It was a Mexican standoff, and everyone knew it. "You're making a big mistake, Harlow," Morrison said, slowly raising his hands. "I got legal authority here. Your authority ends at my property line, and you're trespassing. This ain't over." "Yes, it is." The new voice came from Ahyoka, who had moved to stand beside Daniel. She held Sarah's old rifle. Daniel hadn't even realized she'd gone back inside to get it. "It's over because I choose for it to be over." Morrison's eyes flicked between the two of them, calculating odds. Finally, he smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made Daniel's skin crawl. "Enjoy your Apache whore while you can, Harlow, but don't get too attached. We'll be back." "Get off my land," Daniel said. "Now." Morrison and his men mounted up, but the slaver couldn't resist one final parting shot. "You know what happens to white men who take up with Apache women, don't you, Harlow? They end up dead, along with anyone foolish enough to help them." The three riders spurred their horses and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and the promise of future violence hanging in the air. Daniel didn't lower his weapon until they were completely out of sight. "They'll be back," Ahyoka said matter-of-factly. "I know." Daniel finally holstered his pistol, his hands surprisingly steady. "Probably with more men next time." "Then I should leave, tonight before they return." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Daniel had intended. "I mean, you don't have to leave. This is my choice to make, and I'm making it." Ahyoka studied his face. "Why, you barely know me." Daniel was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because," he paused, surprised by his own honesty, "because for the first time in 3 years, this place feels like more than just a place to wait for death." Something shifted in Ahyoka's expression, surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made Daniel's chest tighten with unfamiliar warmth. "Then we prepare," she said simply. "If Jake Morrison wants a fight, we give him one he won't forget." As the sun began to set over the New Mexico desert, casting long shadows across the ranch, Daniel Harlow realized that his quiet life of solitude was officially over. For better or worse, he'd chosen a side in a war that had been raging long before he'd arrived, and would likely continue long after he was gone. But as he looked at the determined young woman beside him, he found he didn't regret his choice. Not one bit. The real battle was just beginning. The desert wind carried the acrid smell of dust and danger as Daniel and Ahyoka spent the remaining daylight hours preparing for Morrison's inevitable return. The confrontation had stripped away any illusions. This wasn't going to end with words or legal documents. Morrison was a man who took what he wanted, and he wanted Ahyoka back. "How many men can he bring?" Daniel asked as they checked the ammunition stores in his gun cabinet. "As many as money can buy." Ahyoka's fingers moved efficiently, counting cartridges and organizing them by caliber. "Morrison has connections with outlaws, drifters, men who kill for pay. If he offers enough. 20, 30. Maybe more." She paused in her counting. "Daniel, you don't understand what kind of man he is. In the wagon during those weeks, he would hurt us just to hear us cry. Not for any reason, just because he enjoyed it." The matter-of-fact way she said it made Daniel's blood run cold. He'd dealt with his share of bad men over the years, but true sadists were different. They didn't follow the usual rules of greed or desperation. They were driven by something darker and far more dangerous. "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance," Daniel said grimly. They spent the evening turning the ranch house into a fortress. Daniel boarded up windows on the ground floor, leaving only narrow slits for rifle barrels. Ahyoka helped him move furniture to create better defensive positions and cleared sightlines through the house. She worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that preparation meant survival. "You've done this before," Daniel observed as she expertly positioned a heavy table to provide cover while still allowing mobility. "Not like this." but my people have fought to survive for generations. You learn to think like a warrior or you die young." Ahyoka tested the stability of their improvised barricade. "The Apache way is to use terrain weather enemies' weaknesses against them. We don't have terrain advantage here, but we have other things. Such as, we know this ground, they don't. We have better reason to fight. They fight for money, we fight for life, for freedom. That makes us stronger." As darkness fell, they positioned themselves at different windows to watch for approaching riders. Daniel took the front of the house while Ahyoka covered the back and sides. The desert was eerily quiet. Even the usual night sounds of coyotes and insects seemed muted, as if the land itself was holding its breath. "Daniel," Ahyoka's voice came softly from across the room. "Yeah, why didn't you have children with your wife?" The question caught him off guard. For a moment he considered not answering, but something in the darkness made honesty easier. "We tried. Sarah miscarried 3 times, after the last one." He paused, the old pain still sharp after all these years. "The doctor said it wasn't safe for her to try again. Said her body couldn't handle another pregnancy. That must have been hard for both of you." "Sarah took it harder than me. She felt like she'd failed somehow, like she wasn't a real woman if she couldn't bear children." Daniel's voice grew quiet. "I tried to tell her it didn't matter that we had each other, but she never really believed me." "Is that why you live alone out here, away from family's children?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe. Seemed easier than watching other people have what we couldn't." "I understand." Ahyoka's silhouette was barely visible in the moonlight streaming through the window slit. "In my village, women who couldn't bear children were considered blessed by the spirits free to serve the tribe in other ways. But white society is different, more harsh about such things. What about you? Did you want children?" "Once, but after what Morrison and his men did..." She trailed off, then spoke more firmly. "Some dreams must be buried to make room for survival." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, too many to count, coming from multiple directions. Daniel felt his pulse quicken as he peered through the rifle slit. Torches flickered in the darkness, at least a dozen riders spreading out to surround the house. "They're here," he called softly to Ahyoka. "I see them." Her voice was steady, controlled. "More than I expected. Morrison must have promised them good money." The riders stopped just outside rifle range, their torches creating an eerie circle of dancing light around the ranch house. Daniel could make out Morrison's distinctive silhouette on the Pinto, but the other faces were lost in shadow. "Harlow," Morrison's voice carried clearly across the desert air. "This is your last chance to be reasonable. Send out the girl, and nobody else has to get hurt." "Go to hell, Morrison," Daniel shouted back. Laughter echoed from the circle of riders. "That's what I figured you'd say. Always were too stubborn for your own good." Morrison's voice turned cold. "Boys, I want that Apache alive. The rancher, well, he made his choice." The first shot shattered the desert silence, a rifle bullet splintering the window frame inches from Daniel's head. He ducked instinctively, then returned fire, his shot sparking off a rock near one of the torches. The battle had begun. What followed was unlike anything Daniel had experienced even during his brief service in the army. This wasn't organized warfare with clear lines and objectives. This was chaos, violence erupting from every direction as Morrison's men pressed their attack. Rifles cracked and muzzles flashed in the darkness. Bullets thudded into the adobe walls and shattered the remaining glass in the windows. Daniel moved from position to position, firing when he had clear targets, conserving ammunition when he didn't. Years of hunting had made him a good shot, but shooting at men was different from shooting at deer. "Daniel," Ahyoka's voice was urgent. "3 of them are moving toward the barn. If they get behind us..." "I see them." Daniel swiveled his rifle toward the moving shadows. One of Morrison's men had broken from the main group and was using the barn as cover to flank the house. Daniel's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around, and sending him sprawling in the dirt. But more were coming. Morrison hadn't brought just any hired guns. These men knew what they were doing. They used covering fire and coordinated movement, steadily tightening the noose around the ranch house. "We can't hold them off much longer," Daniel called to Ahyoka. "Not like this." "Then we change the fight." Ahyoka's voice carried a note of grim determination. "Apache warriors don't wait for the enemy to choose when and how to fight." "What are you thinking?" "The barn. If we can get there, we have better cover and higher ground from the loft. Plus," she paused to fire at a muzzle flash, "plus there's something in there they don't know about." "What?" "Dynamite. I saw it this morning when we were checking the horses. Old mining supplies, yes." Daniel's mind raced. He'd forgotten about the dynamite left over from when he'd tried to blast out a better foundation for the barn. It had been sitting in a wooden crate for 2 years, and he'd honestly forgotten it was there. That's a hell of a risk. If they have the barn surrounded, they don't. Not yet. Ahyoka was already moving, gathering ammunition and checking her rifle. "But they will soon. We have maybe 10 minutes before they close the circle completely." Daniel looked out at the attacking force. She was right. Most of Morrison's men were focused on the front and sides of the house. The path to the barn was dangerous, but not impossible. "All right," he said, "but we go together. I'm not leaving you to cover my retreat, and I'm not leaving you to cover mine." Ahyoka's smile was visible, even in the dim light. "We do this as partners, or not at all." They made their break during a lull in the firing, slipping out the back door and moving in a low crouch toward the barn. The 50 yards of open ground felt like 50 miles, every shadow potentially hiding an enemy rifle. Bullets whined overhead as Morrison's men spotted their movement, but the covering darkness and their own return fire kept the shots wide. They reached the barn just as 2 of Morrison's men rounded the corner from the other side. The collision was sudden and violent. Daniel grappled with a bearded gunman while Ahyoka found herself face to face with a younger man whose eyes held the cold emptiness of a born killer. Daniel's opponent was strong but clumsy, relying on brute force over skill. They rolled in the dirt, each struggling for control of the other's weapon. Daniel managed to drive his knee into the man's solar plexus, doubling him over, then brought the butt of his rifle down on the back of his skull. The gunman dropped like a sack of grain. Ahyoka's fight was more desperate. Her opponent was faster, trained in knife fighting, and had 6 inches of reach on her. But Apache warriors learned to fight dirty, to use every advantage available. As the killer lunged forward with his blade, Ahyoka threw a handful of dirt into his eyes, then grabbed a piece of broken harness from the ground and whipped it across his face. The metal buckle opened a gash from his ear to his nose, and he stumbled backward, cursing. "The loft," Daniel gasped, hauling Ahyoka toward the ladder. "Move!" They climbed quickly, pulling the ladder up behind them, just as more of Morrison's men converged on the barn. The loft provided exactly what Ahyoka had promised: better cover, higher ground, and clear sight lines to most of the ranch. "The dynamite's in that crate." Daniel pointed to a wooden box near the far wall. "But how do we leave that to me?" Ahyoka was already moving her hands quick and sure as she examined the old blasting supplies. "My grandfather was a warrior who fought the Mexican army. He taught me about explosives they captured from enemy camps." Daniel watched in amazement as she carefully prepared charges using lantern oil and strips of cloth torn from her skirt to create makeshift fuses. Her movements were precise, confident. This wasn't the desperate improvisation of an amateur. "How many charges can you make?" 4, maybe 5. "But we need to be smart about how we use them." Ahyoka looked out through the loft window at the circling riders. "Throw them too close together and we waste the effect. Throw them too far apart and we don't break their formation." "What do you recommend?" "Wait for them to mass for their final assault. Morrison's getting impatient. I can see it in how his men are moving. Soon he'll order a coordinated rush on the barn when they're all committed, all moving in the same direction. She didn't need to finish. Daniel understood. It was a devastating tactic, but also incredibly dangerous. If they mistimed it, or if the dynamite didn't work as expected, they'd be overwhelmed in seconds. Below them, Morrison's voice rang out again. Burn them out, torch the barn, and be done with it. So much for taking me alive, Ahyoka observed dryly. Daniel saw the torches moving closer, riders dismounting to approach on foot with burning brands. Morrison had given up on capturing Ahyoka unharmed. Now he just wanted them both dead. That's it, Ahyoka said, hefting one of her improvised bombs. They're bunching up for the final push. Daniel, when I throw these, we need to be ready to move fast. The explosions will scatter them, but not for long. Where do we go? Back to the house? No, too far, too exposed. Ahyoka's eyes were calculating, planning. The creek, it's only 30 yards from the back of the barn, and the banks provide good cover, if we can reach it. The first torch touched the barn wall, and dry wood began to crackle and smoke. Time had run out. Now, Ahyoka lit the first fuse and hurled the dynamite charge into the largest group of attackers. The explosion was tremendous, a ball of orange fire that lit up the night and sent men diving for cover. Before the echoes faded, she'd thrown the second and third charges, creating a chain of devastating blasts that shattered the organized assault into chaos. Daniel and Ahyoka rappelled down ropes they'd quickly secured to the loft beams, dropping into the confusion and smoke behind the barn. Men were shouting, horses were screaming and rearing, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the growing smoke from the burning building. They ran for the creek bullets whining around them as Morrison's surviving men recovered from the shock and began returning fire. Daniel felt a searing pain across his ribs as one shot came too close, but he kept running. Behind them, the barn was fully ablaze now, casting dancing shadows that made accurate shooting nearly impossible. They reached the creek and tumbled down the muddy bank, finally finding the cover they desperately needed. The water was shallow but fast-moving, fed by mountain springs that never completely dried even in the worst droughts. How many did we get? Daniel gasped, pressing his hand to his bleeding side. Ahyoka peered carefully over the bank. At least 6 down, maybe more, but Morrison's still alive and he's organizing the rest for another assault. You're hurt. She'd noticed the blood seeping between his fingers. Just a graze. I'll live. Daniel checked his ammunition. Question is, for how long? We can't stay here forever. No, but we don't have to. Ahyoka pointed downstream where the creek curved around a rocky outcrop before disappearing into a stand of cottonwood trees. That bend provides concealment for maybe a quarter mile, if we can follow the water without being seen. Where does it lead? Eventually the Rio Grande, but there's a box canyon about 2 miles downstream where the creek cuts through some hills. Lots of caves, narrow passages. Good place for a smaller force to hold off a larger one. Daniel considered their options. Stay and fight with limited ammunition and no cover, or risk a dangerous run through unknown terrain with enemies pursuing them. Neither choice was appealing, but at least movement offered hope. Let's do it. They slipped into the creek, using the muddy banks and overhanging vegetation to mask their movement. The water was cold, fed by snowmelt from mountains still visible as dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. Behind them, the burning barn cast an orange glow that gradually faded as they put distance between themselves and the ranch. Daniel's wound throbbed with each step, but the cold water helped numb the pain. Beside him, Ahyoka moved like a ghost, her Apache training evident in every silent footfall. She'd done this before, evaded pursuit through hostile territory, using natural cover and careful movement. How did you learn to make those bombs? Daniel asked quietly as they waded through a deeper section of the creek. My grandfather, like I said, but also necessity. During the wagon journey, I watched the guards handle their explosives when they needed to clear rocks from the trail. I remembered everything, thinking someday the knowledge might be useful. Her voice was matter-of-fact. When you're a prisoner, you learn to notice things that might help you escape. They'd covered perhaps a mile when the sound of pursuit reached them. Horses splashing through the creek behind them, men calling out coordinates and search patterns. Morrison had figured out their escape route. "They're gaining ground," Daniel observed. "Horse can't follow where we're going." Ahyoka pointed ahead to where the creek narrowed and the banks rose into steep, rocky walls. "From here, we climb." The next hour was a nightmare of scrambling over loose rocks and clinging to narrow ledges while trying to remain silent. Daniel's wound reopened during the climb, leaving a trail of blood that he prayed their pursuers wouldn't notice in the darkness. Ahyoka stayed close, helping him when his strength flagged, guiding him along paths that seemed impossible but somehow held their weight. Finally, they reached a broad ledge overlooking the canyon below. The creek was a silver ribbon in the moonlight, and they could see the scattered lights of torches as Morrison's men searched the area they'd abandoned. "This is good," Ahyoka said, examining the defensible position. "They'll have to come up one at a time if they want to reach us, and there are other ways out if we need them." Daniel slumped against a boulder, finally allowing himself to feel the full extent of his exhaustion and pain. "How did you know about this place?" "Apache territory extends through here. My people have used these canyons for generations, hunting, hiding, sometimes fighting." She knelt beside him, examining his wound by moonlight. "This needs proper cleaning, but it's not as bad as it could be. The bullet just grazed you." "Feels worse than a graze. Pain is good, means you're alive." Ahyoka tore another strip from her already tattered skirt to use as a bandage. "My grandmother used to say that scars are just proof that you were stronger than whatever tried to kill you." Wise woman. She was. "The soldiers killed her when I was 12, said she was harboring fugitives." Ahyoka's hands were gentle as she bound his wound. She was. Apache children whose parents had been taken by slavers like Morrison. She fed them, healed them, found new families for them when possible. Daniel winced as she tightened the makeshift bandage. "Is that why you speak English so well? You spent time with white prisoners." "Some, but mostly mission school, like I told you. The priests thought they could make us into proper Christian ladies if they just taught us enough scripture and domestic skills." Her laugh held no humor. "They never understood that Apache women are already strong. We didn't need their version of strength." Below them, voices echoed off the canyon walls as Morrison's men tried to figure out where their quarry had gone. Daniel could make out individual words, curses mostly, and growing frustration. The slavers had expected an easy fight, not a running battle through treacherous terrain. "They'll find us eventually," Daniel said. "Morrison's not the type to give up." "No, but he's also not the type to risk his own life unnecessarily. If we make this too costly, too dangerous, he might decide we're more trouble than we're worth." Ahyoka settled beside him on the ledge. "The question is whether we can hold out long enough to reach that point. How long can you keep this up? Running, fighting, living like fugitives?" Ahyoka was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes reflecting the distant stars. "As long as necessary. I've been running one way or another since the day Morrison's men destroyed my village. At least now I'm not running alone." The simple honesty of her words hit Daniel harder than he'd expected. For 3 years he'd been running too, from grief, from memories, from the possibility of caring about anything or anyone again. But sitting here on this rocky ledge, wounded and hunted, he felt more alive than he had since Sarah's death. "What happens if we survive this?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do we do next? Morrison might be gone, but there'll be others like him, and we can't spend the rest of our lives hiding in canyons." Ahyoka considered this. "My people have a saying, the river finds its way to the sea no matter how many rocks block its path. We find our way too. We survive, we adapt, we keep moving until we reach where we're supposed to be. And where is that? I don't know yet, but I think She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. I think maybe it's not about the place. Maybe it's about the people you choose to travel with. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of grief that had been locked tight for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Ahyoka! A rifle shot echoed through the canyon, the bullets sparking off the rock face just above their heads. Morrison's men had found their trail. Time to move, Ahyoka said, already gathering their few possessions. There's another ledge about 100 feet higher that's even more defensible. Can you make the climb? Daniel struggled to his feet, gritting his teeth against the pain. Lead the way. As they began the treacherous ascent to higher ground, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were climbing toward something more than just a better defensive position. Whatever happened with Morrison, whatever dangers still lay ahead, something fundamental had changed between him and the Apache woman risking her life beside him. For the first time in years, Daniel Harlow was thinking about a future that stretched beyond mere survival. And despite the bullets and the blood and the very real possibility that dawn might find them both dead, that future looked surprisingly bright. The second ledge proved to be a natural fortress carved from red sandstone with walls that rose nearly vertical on 3 sides and only one narrow approach that could be easily defended. Daniel collapsed against the far wall, his strength finally giving out as the adrenaline that had sustained him through the night began to fade. Drink this. Ahyoka pressed a small gourd to his lips. She'd filled it from the creek during their climb. The water was cold and tasted of minerals, but it was the most refreshing thing Daniel had experienced in hours. Where did that come from? He asked, noticing the intricately carved gourd for the first time. Apache women always carry water vessels. This one belonged to my grandmother. Ahyoka's fingers traced the spiral patterns etched into the surface. She gave it to me before the soldiers came, said it would keep me connected to our people no matter how far I traveled. Below them, the sounds of pursuit continued. Morrison's men were methodical now, checking every possible hiding place and following what little trail remained visible in the rocky terrain. But the climb to their current position would be treacherous even in daylight. At night, it bordered on suicidal. They're not giving up, Daniel observed, watching the distant torch flames move through the canyon. Morrison can't afford to. If word gets out that an Apache woman and a lone rancher fought off his entire gang, his reputation dies. Men like him survive on fear and the belief that they're unstoppable. Ahyoka checked her rifle, counting the remaining ammunition with practiced efficiency. He'll keep coming until one of us is dead. Then we need to end this. Daniel struggled to sit up straighter. Tonight, before he can bring reinforcements or find a way to trap us up here. What are you thinking? Daniel was quiet for a moment, his mind working through possibilities. 3 years of solitary ranch life had taught him patience and careful planning. You didn't survive in this territory by acting impulsively. Morrison's strength is numbers and firepower, but he's also arrogant, used to having overwhelming advantages. Daniel pointed down at the narrow trail that led to their position. What if we could turn that arrogance against him? Make him think he's won. Make him believe we're trapped, desperate, ready to surrender. Daniel's voice grew stronger as the plan took shape. Draw him up here personally, away from his men where numbers don't matter. Ahyoka studied his face in the moonlight. That's incredibly dangerous. If Morrison suspects a trap, he won't. His ego won't let him. Men like Morrison always believe their own legends. Daniel tested his wounded side, grimacing at the pain, but finding he could move when necessary. The question is, are you willing to trust me, because what I'm thinking will put you in considerable danger. More danger than we're already in. Different kind of danger. This would require you to play a role, act like the broken, helpless woman Morrison expects you to be. Ahyoka's eyes flashed with something dangerous. I stopped being that woman the moment I cut my ropes and ran into the desert. I won't pretend to be her again, not even to save our lives. I'm not asking you to be her. I'm asking you to let Morrison think you are just long enough for us to get close." Daniel leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Listen to me. Morrison's seen Apache women broken by what he does to them. He expects fear, submission, defeat. If you can convince him that's what he's seeing, while you do what? Get behind him. Take out his advantage." Daniel's hand moved to the knife at his belt. Morrison's used to fighting from a distance with superior numbers. Up close, man to man, he's just another bully who's never faced real consequences. Ahyoka was silent for a long moment, considering. It could work, but if Morrison realizes what we're doing before you're in position, he'll kill us both. I know. Daniel met her eyes. I won't lie to you about the risks. But sitting here waiting for dawn isn't going to save us either. Eventually they'll find a way up, or more men will arrive, or we'll run out of ammunition and water and die slowly instead of quickly. Ahyoka's smile was grim but determined. Apache warriors don't choose the manner of their death, but they do choose to face it with courage. If this is how we die, at least we die fighting. We're not going to die, Daniel said, with more confidence than he felt. But we need to move soon. Morrison's getting frustrated down there, and frustrated men make mistakes. They spent the next few minutes working out the details of their desperate plan. It was risky to the point of being suicidal, but it had one crucial advantage. Morrison would never expect his victims to voluntarily put themselves in greater danger. Remember, Daniel said as they prepared to descend to a lower ledge. You need to seem broken but not completely helpless. Morrison's smart enough to be suspicious if you appear too defeated. I understand. And Daniel, Ahyoka's hand briefly touched his arm. If this goes wrong, if Morrison kills you before you can get to him, I want you to know that these past 2 days have been the first time since my village was destroyed that I've felt like I was living instead of just surviving. The simple honesty of her words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Before he could respond, she was already moving, picking her way carefully down the treacherous path toward the position where they would spring their trap. Daniel gave her a 5-minute head start, then began his own descent along a different route, one that would bring him around behind Morrison's position if everything went according to plan. The rocks were loose and unstable, made more dangerous by darkness and his wounded condition. Every step required careful consideration, and more than once he found himself hanging by his fingertips over drops that would mean instant death. As he climbed, Daniel could hear Ahyoka's voice echoing through the canyon, speaking in Apache. At first, then switching to broken English that carried the perfect note of exhausted desperation. Please, she called out. No more running, I surrender. Morrison's response was immediate and predictable. Where's the rancher girl? Where's Harlow? Gone. Ahyoka's voice was weak, defeated. Left me when the shooting started. Said I wasn't worth dying for. Daniel gritted his teeth at hearing her play the role, even knowing it was necessary. The idea that anyone could think Ahyoka wasn't worth protecting made his blood boil. Smart man, Morrison called back. Smarter than I gave him credit for. Come on down here, girl. Time to finish this. I'm hurt, Ahyoka replied. Fell during the climb. Can't make it down alone. There was a pause, then Morrison's voice again, closer now. Boys, stay down there and keep watch. I'm going up to collect our Apache. Perfect. Daniel had counted on Morrison's arrogance and his desire to personally claim his prize. The slaver wouldn't trust his men with something so valuable, especially not after the humiliation of the night's battle. Daniel reached his target position just as Morrison began climbing toward Ahyoka's location. The slaver was moving carefully but confidently, clearly, believing the fight was over. His rifle was slung across his back, and he carried only a pistol in his right hand, another sign that he considered the danger past. From his concealed position, Daniel could see both Morrison and Ahyoka on the narrow ledge where she waited. She had positioned herself perfectly, appearing vulnerable while actually maintaining multiple escape routes if the plan failed. "Well, well," Morrison said as he reached her position. "You don't look so fierce now, do you? All that Apache pride seems to have leaked out of you." "Please," Ahyoka whispered, not having to fake the tremor in her voice. "I just want it to be over." "Oh, it will be. But first you and me are going to have a little conversation about respect, about what happens to women who run away from their rightful owners." Morrison holstered his pistol and reached for the rope at his belt. "See, I can't have word getting out that Jake Morrison lets his property escape. Bad for business, you understand." Daniel began moving, using Morrison's focus on Ahyoka to mask his approach. Every step had to be silent, every movement calculated. One loose rock, one snapped twig, and the advantage would be lost. "You killed my friends," Ahyoka said, her voice carrying just the right note of accusation mixed with fear. "The other women in the wagon, what happened to them?" Morrison laughed to sound like breaking glass. "What do you think happened to them? They learned their place, or they died learning it, just like you're about to." The casual cruelty in his voice made Daniel's vision blur with rage. This was the man who had destroyed entire families, who treated human beings like cattle to be bought and sold. Every instinct Daniel possessed screamed for immediate violence, but he forced himself to remain patient. Timing was everything. "The rancher who helped me," Ahyoka continued, "Daniel Harlow. You said he was smart to leave me. Maybe you're right. Maybe no white man would really risk his life for an Apache woman." "Damn right he wouldn't. White men got more sense than to die for Indian tail." Morrison stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see the ugly scar that ran down his face. "But don't worry, girl. I'll make sure you earn your keep before we reach the next town. Hell, maybe I'll keep you for myself instead of selling you. Been a while since I had me a pet Apache." That was enough. Daniel moved with all the speed and fury that 3 years of grief and rage could provide. His knife was in his hand before Morrison even realized he wasn't alone on the ledge. The blade took Morrison in the side, sliding between ribs with surgical precision. The slaver's eyes went wide with shock and pain, his mouth opening in a soundless scream. "That's for every woman you've hurt," Daniel whispered, twisting the knife. "Every family you've destroyed." Morrison tried to reach for his gun, but Ahyoka was already there, her small hand surprisingly strong as she pinned his arms. Between them, they wrestled the dying man to his knees. "Look at me," Ahyoka commanded, her voice no longer weak or frightened. "I want you to see who's killing you, not some broken Apache girl, but a warrior whose people have fought men like you for generations." Morrison's eyes focused on her face with obvious effort. Blood was flowing freely from his wound, now staining the red rocks even redder. You, he gasped. "I am Ahyoka, daughter of Mountain Wind, granddaughter of Stormwalker. I am Apache, and I am free." Her voice carried the weight of generations. "And you will never hurt another woman again." Morrison tried to speak, tried to curse them both, but death was faster than his hatred. His body went limp and the canyon fell silent except for the distant sound of running water. Daniel pulled his knife free and wiped it clean on Morrison's shirt. "It's over." "No," Ahyoka said quietly. "Not yet. His men are still down there." As if summoned by her words, voices echoed up from the canyon floor. Morrison's remaining followers had heard the scuffle and were calling for their leader. "Boss Morrison, you all right up there?" Daniel and Ahyoka exchanged glances. They had perhaps minutes before the other men realized something was wrong and began climbing up to investigate. "How many left?" Daniel asked. "I counted 8 when they split up to search. We got at least 3 with the dynamite, maybe 4. Ahyoka was already moving, searching Morrison's body for weapons and ammunition. "So 4 or 5 still alive." "Better odds than we've had all night." "Yes, but they'll be more careful now, more suspicious." Ahyoka found Morrison's rifle and checked the ammunition. "And they know we're up here somewhere. Then we don't wait for them to come to us." Daniel's mind was already working on their next move. We take the fight to them while they're still confused and leaderless. Morrison's death won't stop them immediately. These men are professionals. They'll want to finish the job and collect whatever payment they can. But they'll also be thinking about escape routes, about getting out alive instead of just completing the mission. Daniel tested his wounded side again. The pain was manageable now, pushed back by necessity and adrenaline. Fear makes people sloppy. They began their descent, moving faster now that Morrison was no longer a threat. The remaining slavers were scattered through the canyon, their torchlights revealing their positions as clearly as if they'd been waving signal flags. 3 of them are near the creek, Ahyoka observed, pointing out the distant flames. 2 more by that rock formation to the east. We take the isolated ones first, divide their numbers before they can regroup. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse through the canyon's maze of rocks and shadows. Daniel and Ahyoka moved like spirits, using their knowledge of the terrain and the confusion following Morrison's death to strike at the remaining slavers from unexpected directions. The first man died without knowing what hit him, Ahyoka's knife sliding between his ribs as he stood watch by the creek. The second managed a single shout before Daniel's rifle silenced him permanently. The third and fourth tried to make a stand behind a cluster of boulders, but they were thinking defensively now, worried about survival rather than attack. By the time the sun began to paint the eastern sky with pale gold light, only one of Morrison's men remained alive. They found him attempting to catch his horse, which had bolted during the night's violence. He surrendered immediately upon seeing Daniel's rifle pointed at his chest. "Please," the man stammered, his hands raised high. "I was just hired muscle. Morrison never told us about no Apache warriors or whatever hell you 2 are." "What's your name?" Daniel asked. Pete Morrison. No relation to Jake, just coincidence." "Well, Pete Morrison, you've got a choice to make." Daniel's voice was steady, controlled. "You can ride out of here right now and never come back. Never mention what happened here, never work for slavers again, or what? Or we leave your bones for the coyotes, same as we're going to do with your boss." Pete nodded frantically. "And I'll go right now. Never saw you folks, never heard of this place." "Smart man." Daniel lowered his rifle slightly. "But Pete, if I ever hear about you working for men like Morrison again, if I ever get word that you've hurt innocent people." "You won't. I swear on my mother's grave you won't." They let him go, watching as he rode away, at a gallop, clearly eager to put as much distance as possible between himself and the nightmare the canyon had become. As the last hoofbeats faded into silence, Daniel and Ahyoka found themselves alone with the dawn and the bodies of their enemies. The immediate danger was over, but the larger questions remained. "What now?" Daniel asked. Ahyoka was quiet for a moment, watching the sun rise over the desert. "Morrison's dead, but there are others like him. There always will be. I know, but we don't have to fight them all, don't we?" She turned to face him, her dark eyes serious. "As long as there are men who see Apache women as property to be bought and sold, as long as there are officials who will sign false warrants for enough money, then we fight the ones we can reach and protect the ones we can save." Daniel moved closer to her, surprised by his own certainty. "But we don't have to do it alone." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my ranch needs rebuilding. The barn's gone, the house needs repairs, and I could use a partner who knows how to manage land properly." Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm saying that maybe we've both been running from the wrong things." Ahyoka studied his face in the growing light. "You're offering me a home, a real home, not just temporary shelter. I'm offering you a choice, a chance to build something instead of just surviving." Daniel's voice was soft but firm. "No obligations, no expectations beyond partnership and mutual respect. What we make of it beyond that, well, that's up to both of us." For a moment, Ahyoka didn't respond. She looked out over the canyon where they'd fought for their lives, then back at Daniel's honest, weathered face. My grandmother used to say that some paths choose the walker, not the other way around. She smiled, and Daniel saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before: hope. Maybe this is one of those paths. So you'll come back with me? Help rebuild? I'll come back with you, she agreed. But not to your ranch, to our ranch. If we're going to be partners, we're going to be real partners. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of loneliness and grief that had been pulling tighter for 3 years. Our ranch, I like the sound of that. They gathered what supplies they could from Morrison's men and began the long walk back toward civilization. The journey would take most of the day, but for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel wasn't dreading the future that lay ahead. As they walked, Ahyoka told him about Apache farming techniques that could triple his cattle capacity. Daniel shared his plans for expanding the water rights and building better winter shelters. They talked about practical things, fencing and irrigation, and which crops grew best in New Mexico soil. But underneath the mundane conversations lay something deeper. They were planning a life together, not just survival, but an actual future built on shared work and mutual respect. It was a fragile thing, this new partnership, but it felt stronger than anything Daniel had experienced since losing Sarah. There's something you should know, Ahyoka said as they paused to rest in the shade of a large boulder, about what Morrison said about keeping me as a pet. That's not the worst thing he did to the women he captured. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't have to tell me. Yes, I do, because if we're going to build a life together, it has to be built on truth. Ahyoka's voice was steady, but Daniel could see the cost of the words. Morrison didn't just sell women to brothels. He broke them first, made sure they understood that resistance was hopeless, that they were property to be used however their owners pleased. Ahyoka, I was lucky. I escaped before he could, before the worst happened, but the other women... She was quiet for a moment. Some of them stopped fighting, stopped hoping, became the broken things Morrison wanted them to be. But you didn't. No, I didn't, but that doesn't mean I'm not damaged. Ahyoka looked at him directly. I may never be able to be the kind of woman who can give you children, who can be a proper wife in the way white society expects. I don't want a proper wife, Daniel said quietly. I want a partner, someone who chooses to stand beside me not because society says she should, but because she wants to. And if I can never give you the family you wanted with Sarah... Daniel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question and what his honest answer should be. Sarah and I wanted children because we thought that's what made a family, but maybe family is just people who choose to take care of each other, people who build something together that's stronger than what either could build alone. Ahyoka's smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. You really mean that. I really do. They resumed walking, but something fundamental had changed between them. The partnership they'd spoken of was evolving into something deeper, something that neither had expected to find in the aftermath of violence and loss. As the sun reached its zenith and the familiar outline of Daniel's ranch came into view, they could see the smoke still rising from the ruins of the barn. The house appeared intact, but there would be bullet holes to patch, broken windows to replace, and a dozen other repairs needed before the place was livable again. It's going to be a lot of work, Daniel observed. Good, Ahyoka replied. I'm tired of running. I'm ready to build. They approached the ranch hand in hand, two survivors who had found in each other something worth fighting for. Behind them lay the bodies of their enemies and the ghosts of their separate pasts. Ahead lay the hard work of reconstruction, both of the ranch and of their own wounded hearts. But for the first time in years, both Daniel and Ahyoka were looking forward instead of back. They had survived the night, defeated their enemies, and chosen each other. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The ranch might be damaged, but it was far from destroyed. Like the two people walking toward it, it just needed patience, care, and the right kind of attention to become something beautiful again, something worth defending, something worth calling home. The acrid smell of charred wood grew stronger as they approached the ranch, mingling with the familiar scents of sage and cattle. Daniel's heart sank as he surveyed the damage in full daylight. The barn was nothing but blackened timber and twisted metal, still smoking hours after the fire had consumed it. Bullet holes peppered the adobe walls of the house like deadly freckles, and the vegetable garden Sarah had planted was trampled beyond recognition. "It looks worse than it is," Ahyoka said, though her voice carried its own note of dismay. "The foundation of the barn is still solid. The house's main structure is intact. These things can be rebuilt." "Can they?" Daniel kicked at a piece of charred wood that had once been part of the barn door. "Morrison's dead, but word of what happened here will spread. Other men like him will come looking for revenge or just to test whether we can be broken." "Let them come." Ahyoka's voice carried a steel that made Daniel look at her sharply. "We'll be ready." "You say that like you're planning to stay and fight every slaver and bounty hunter between here and Mexico." "If that's what it takes." She walked to where the barn had stood, studying the remains with a practical eye. "Daniel, do you know what my name means? In Apache, no. She who brings joy." Ahyoka's smile was bitter. "My parents named me that because I was born during the spring celebrations when the whole village was happy. But I haven't brought much joy to anyone lately." Daniel moved to stand beside her, close enough to see the pain she usually kept hidden behind her warrior's facade. "You brought joy to me. These past few days, for the first time since Sarah died, I've felt like there was a reason to keep going. Even after last night, even after seeing what I'm capable of when cornered, especially after last night." Daniel's voice was firm. "I've seen you fight for your freedom, Kill, to protect yourself, risk everything to save others. If that's not worth admiring, I don't know what is." Ahyoka was quiet for a moment, running her fingers through the ashes of what had been their shelter. In Apache culture, when warriors returned from battle, the women of the village examine their weapons, their wounds, their eyes. They look for signs that the warrior has lost something essential in the fighting. And what do they look for? Whether the warrior still remembers that fighting is meant to protect life, not destroy it. Whether they can still choose mercy when mercy is possible. She looked up at him. "Last night when Morrison was dying, I wanted to make it slow. I wanted him to suffer the way he made others suffer. But you didn't." "No, because I could feel you watching me, and I knew that if I let myself become the kind of person who enjoys causing pain, I would lose something I could never get back." Ahyoka's voice was barely above a whisper. "I would lose the right to be the woman you see when you look at me." Daniel felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Ahyoka, I would never judge you for—" "Yes, you would. Not consciously maybe, but you would. Because the woman you're falling in love with is someone who brings joy, not someone who brings death." She smiled sadly. "I saw it in your eyes when I killed Morrison. Relief that it was over, but also concern about who I might become if violence becomes too easy for me." The honesty of her words hit Daniel like a physical blow. She was right, he had felt exactly that mixture of relief and worry. But hearing her acknowledge it, hearing her say he was falling in love with her. "Is that what's happening?" he asked quietly. "Are we falling in love?" "I don't know. I've never been in love before. In my village, marriages were often arranged for political or economic reasons. Love was something that might grow over time, not something that struck like lightning." Ahyoka picked up a piece of unburned wood, testing its strength. "But I know that when I thought Morrison might kill you, when I saw you bleeding, I felt something I'd never felt before, like part of me was being torn away. And when I saw those rope burns on your wrists, when I realized what men like Morrison had done to you," Daniel's hands clenched into fists, "I wanted to kill every one of them with my bare hands, not for justice, not for revenge, but because they'd hurt you." "That sounds like love to me." or at least the beginning of it. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their mutual confession settling between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross so soon. Around them the ranch waited for their decision: rebuild or abandon, stay and fight or run and hide. "We'll need supplies," Daniel said finally. "Lumber for the barn, glass for the windows, ammunition, food. That means going into town. Will they sell to us an Apache woman and a white man who killed Jake Morrison? Only one way to find out." Daniel looked toward the road that led to the nearest settlement. "But I should warn you, Esperanza isn't exactly a progressive town. There'll be stares, comments, maybe worse. I've faced worse than small-town prejudice." "I know you have, but this is different. This is choosing to walk into hostility instead of being forced into it." Daniel's expression was serious. "In town, you won't be a warrior defending her life. You'll be a woman trying to buy supplies with her. What partner, husband, what do we tell people we are?" It was a fair question, one that would determine how they were received and whether local businesses would deal with them at all. Unmarried couples living together were scandalous enough without adding the complication of different races. "We tell them we're married," Ahyoka said after a moment's consideration. "It's not true yet, but it's simpler than trying to explain the truth. Yet, well, if we're going to rebuild this place together, if we're going to face whatever comes next as partners..." Ahyoka's cheeks colored slightly. "It seems like the practical thing to do, doesn't it? Make it official." Daniel stared at her, not quite believing what he was hearing. "Are you proposing to me?" "I'm suggesting a practical arrangement that benefits both of us," she said primly, then broke into a grin. "But yes, I suppose I am proposing to you. Is that against white custom?" "It's against traditional custom, but I've never been much for tradition." Daniel found himself smiling despite everything they'd been through. "Besides, nothing about our situation has been traditional so far." "So is that a yes?" "That's a yes, but not just for practical reasons." Daniel reached for her hands, noting how small they seemed in his despite their obvious strength. "I want to marry you because I can't imagine facing the future without you, because you've made me remember what it feels like to have something worth protecting. And I want to marry you because you see me as I am, not as what others expect me to be." Ahyoka's voice was soft but certain. "Because when I'm with you, I remember who I was before Morrison, before the violence, before I had to become hard to survive. Then it's settled. We'll go into town as Mr. and Mrs. Harlow, buy what we need to rebuild and deal with whatever problems arise." "What about a ceremony? Don't white people require ceremonies for marriages to be legal?" Daniel considered this. "There's a circuit preacher who comes through Esperanza once a month. If we time it right, but that assumes we can find someone willing to perform a mixed-race marriage. And if we can't, then we'll consider ourselves married in the eyes of God and each other. Legal papers can wait until we find someone brave enough to sign them." They spent the rest of the morning salvaging what they could from the damaged ranch. Daniel's rifle collection had survived the fire hidden in a root cellar that Morrison's men had never found. Ahyoka located several tools and some preserved food that would keep them fed until they could reach town. But it was while searching through the ruins of the barn that Ahyoka made a discovery that changed everything. "Daniel," she called, her voice strange. "Come here. You need to see this." He found her kneeling beside what had been the barn's back wall, staring at something half buried in the debris. Following her gaze, Daniel saw it too, a human hand, pale and motionless, extending from beneath a collapsed beam. "That's not one of Morrison's men," Daniel said, his blood running cold. "We accounted for all of them." Together they carefully moved the debris, revealing the body of a young woman in a torn calico dress. She was white, probably no more than 18, with blonde hair matted with blood and dirt. But it was the rope burns around her wrists and ankles that made Daniel's stomach clench with recognition. "Another captive," Ahyoka whispered. "Morrison had another prisoner we didn't know about. She must have been hidden in the barn when the fighting started, when it caught fire." Daniel's voice trailed off as the implications hit him. God in heaven, we killed her. Our dynamite, our fire, we killed an innocent woman. No, Ahyoka's voice was sharp. Morrison killed her. Morrison and his trade in human misery. We didn't even know she was here. That doesn't matter. She's dead because of what we did. She's dead because of what Morrison did. Ahyoka stood, her face pale but determined. If we hadn't fought back, if we'd let Morrison take me, how many more women would have died? How many more would have suffered what she suffered? Daniel knew she was right logically, but logic did nothing to ease the weight of guilt settling on his shoulders. This young woman had died while they were fighting for their freedom, burned alive in a fire they had started. We have to bury her properly, he said. Find out who she was, if she has family. Yes, but first we search her carefully. She might have something that tells us where she came from, who took her. Ahyoka's voice was clinical, professional. Information that could help us find others, stop more kidnappings. The search revealed little, a small silver locket with a miniature photograph of an older couple, probably her parents, and a letter addressed to Miss Elizabeth Hutchins from someone named Thomas in a place called Cedar Falls, Kansas. She was traveling, Ahyoka observed, studying the letter. This Thomas was expecting her arrival, a fiancé maybe, or family. How did Morrison get her? Stagecoach, most likely. Rob the passengers, take anyone young and attractive enough to sell. Ahyoka's expression was grim. It's a common tactic. Attack isolated travelers, make it look like Indian raids or bandit activity. Daniel felt sick. How many Elizabeth Hutchins were out there taken from their families and sold into slavery while the authorities looked the other way or actively participated? How many Morrisons operated with impunity across the territory? We can't save them all, Ahyoka said, reading his thoughts. But we can make sure this one gets home, even if it's just her body and her memory. They buried Elizabeth Hutchins on a hill overlooking the ranch, marking her grave with stones arranged in a cross pattern. Daniel spoke a few words over the grave. He wasn't a religious man, but it seemed the least they could do. Elizabeth Hutchins, he said, his hat in his hands. We didn't know you, but we're sorry we couldn't save you. We promise your family will know what happened to you, and that the man who took you can never hurt anyone else. Ahyoka added her own words in Apache, a traditional song for the dead that her grandmother had taught her. The melody was haunting, ancient, carrying a weight of loss that transcended language or culture. When they finished, they stood in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ahyoka spoke. This changes things, doesn't it? We can't just rebuild and hope the past stays buried. There are others out there like Elizabeth, and there are other men like Morrison. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe our ranch should be more than just a place to raise cattle. Maybe it should be a place where people like Elizabeth can find safety if they escape, or a base for finding them if they don't. Daniel studied her face, seeing the determination that had carried her through captivity and violence. You want to actively hunt slavers. I want to make sure what happened to Elizabeth, what happened to me, happens to as few people as possible. Ahyoka's voice was steady. We have skills, Daniel. We know how these men operate. We could make a difference. It would be dangerous. We'd be making enemies of some very powerful people. We already have. Morrison's death won't go unnoticed. Other slavers will want revenge, or they'll see us as a threat to be eliminated. Ahyoka looked out over the land that was slowly becoming theirs. At least this way, we'd be choosing our battles, instead of just reacting to them. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, weighing the implications. The safe choice would be to rebuild, lay low, and hope their reputation was enough to keep trouble away. But looking at Elizabeth's grave, thinking about the women still in chains somewhere, he knew that safety was an illusion. If we do this, we do it right, he said finally. No vigilante justice, no killing unless absolutely necessary. We work with law enforcement when possible, gather evidence, build cases that will stick. And when law enforcement is corrupt, when sheriffs and judges are taking money to look the other way, then we find honest ones. They exist, men like Sheriff Martinez and Santa Fe Judge Thompson in Albuquerque, build a network of people who actually care about justice. Ahyoka nodded slowly. It could work, but we'd need to be careful, strategic. One mistake and we'd end up like Elizabeth, dead and forgotten. Then we don't make mistakes. As they walked back toward the house, Daniel felt a strange sense of rightness about their decision. For 3 years, he'd been drifting through life without purpose, existing but not truly living. Now, suddenly, he had both a partner and a mission that felt worthy of the risks involved. "There's something else we need to discuss," Ahyoka said as they reached the porch. "If we're going to marry, if we're going to work together like this, you need to understand that I may never be the wife you had with Sarah." "What do you mean?" "I mean that what Morrison's men did, what I saw them do to other women, it changed something inside me. Physical intimacy, the kind married couples share." She paused, struggling for words. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to be comfortable with that." Daniel felt his heart clench with sympathy and something deeper, a protective instinct that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with love. "Ahyoka, will take things as slowly as you need. And if physical intimacy never happens, that doesn't make you less of a wife or me less of a husband. You say that now, but I say that because I mean it." Daniel's voice was firm. "I've been married before, remember? The best parts of marriage weren't the physical ones. They were the conversations, the shared dreams, the way Sarah and I could work together on difficult problems. The rest is just one way people express love, not the only way. And if someday I want to try, if I think I might be ready, then we'll try. And if it doesn't work, we'll find other ways to be close." Daniel reached for her hand, noting how she only tensed slightly before allowing the contact. "Ahyoka, the woman I'm falling in love with, is strong, intelligent, brave, and kind. Everything else is just details." Her smile was tremulous but genuine. "How did I get so lucky to find someone who understands without explanations, who accepts without conditions? I think we found each other, and I think Elizabeth's death, as tragic as it is, showed us what we're really supposed to be doing with our lives. Building something together, something that matters." Exactly. They spent the afternoon making detailed plans for their trip to town. They would need to present a united front, appear prosperous enough to pay for their purchases, but not so wealthy as to attract unwanted attention. Daniel would handle most of the talking, while Ahyoka would remain politely silent, unless directly addressed, a compromise with social expectations that galled them both but seemed necessary. "Remember," Daniel said as they prepared to leave the next morning, "if anyone gets aggressive, if the situation starts to turn ugly, we leave immediately. No heroics, no standing on principle. We can't help anyone if we're dead or in jail." "Understood." "But Daniel," Ahyoka's hand rested on the rifle concealed in her saddle pack, "if someone tries to take me, if they think an Apache woman is easy prey, I won't go quietly. I wouldn't expect you to. Just try to avoid killing anyone unless absolutely necessary. Small towns have long memories for that sort of thing." The ride to Esperanza took most of the morning, giving them time to rehearse their story and prepare for whatever reception awaited them. As they crested the final hill before town, Daniel could see the dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and various other businesses that served the surrounding ranches and the occasional traveler. "Not much to look at," Ahyoka observed. "No, but it's what we've got. The nearest real city is 3 days hard riding, and we need supplies now." They rode down the main street slowly, giving the townspeople time to look them over and make their judgments. Daniel noted the mix of curiosity, suspicion, and outright hostility in the faces they passed. News traveled fast in small towns, and word of the battle at his ranch had undoubtedly reached Esperanza already. "Daniel Harlow," a voice called from the porch of the general store. "Heard you had some excitement out your way." The speaker was Tom Bradley, the store's owner, a thin, nervous man who sold overpriced goods to ranchers who had no other choice. Daniel had never liked him much, but Bradley was reliable and usually had what people needed. "Some," Daniel replied carefully, "nothing we couldn't handle." "So I heard. Also heard you're keeping interesting company these days." Bradley's eyes flicked to Ahyoka with obvious disapproval. "This is my wife," Daniel said evenly, "Mrs. Harlow." The lie came easily, but Daniel saw how it affected the small crowd that had gathered. Mixed marriages weren't unheard of in the territory, but they were rare enough to draw attention and common enough to make some people uncomfortable. "Your wife." Bradley's tone made it clear what he thought of that arrangement. "Well, I suppose congratulations are in order." "Thank you. Now we need supplies, lumber nails, glass ammunition. Can you help us, or should we try somewhere else?" The threat was subtle but clear. Bradley's store was the only real source of building materials for 50 miles, and he needed customers more than he needed to express his personal opinions. "I can help you," Bradley said, after a moment's hesitation, "though some items might take time to order." "That's fine, we're not in a hurry." But as they dismounted and began discussing their needs, Daniel could feel the tension in the air. Other townspeople were gathering, their conversations growing quieter but more intense. Ahyoka stayed close to his side, her posture alert but non-threatening. It was when they were loading their purchases onto a borrowed wagon that the trouble finally started. "Daniel Harlow," the voice was cold, authoritative. "I need to speak with you." Daniel turned to see Sheriff Wade approaching a man he'd met only once before, but whose reputation for corruption was well known throughout the territory. Wade was tall and lean with cold gray eyes and a badge that he wore more like a weapon than a symbol of justice. "Sheriff Wade, what can I do for you? Understand there was some shooting out at your place. Multiple fatalities." Wade's eyes flicked to Ahyoka. "Funny thing about that, Jake Morrison and his boys rode out of town 2 days ago, and now they're dead. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Daniel felt Ahyoka tense beside him, her hand moving subtly toward her concealed weapon. "Morrison and his men attacked my ranch," Daniel said carefully. "Tried to kidnap my wife. I defended my property and my family, as is my legal right." "Your wife?" Wade's smile was cold. "Funny thing about that, too. See, I got a telegram this morning from a federal marshal up in Colorado Territory. Says he's looking for an escaped Apache woman named Ahyoka. Dangerous criminal, apparently, wanted for murder." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. A federal warrant would trump any local authority, and if Wade was working with Morrison's associates— "I think there's been some mistake, Sheriff," Daniel said. "My wife's name is Maria Harlow. We were married last month in Santa Fe." "That's so. Then you won't mind if I see the marriage certificate." It was a trap beautifully set. Wade knew they couldn't produce legal documents because the marriage was a fiction, but Daniel had been thinking about this possibility during the ride to town. "The certificate is in our safety deposit box at the bank in Santa Fe," he said smoothly. "We can arrange for copies to be sent if you need them for your records. Or," Wade said, his hand resting on his gun butt, "I could just take this woman into custody pending verification of her identity. Federal marshals take a dim view of harboring fugitives." The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the confrontation. Daniel could see faces in the gathering, some merely curious, others openly hostile. If shooting started here, innocent people would be caught in the crossfire. "Sheriff?" a new voice interrupted. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter more privately." The speaker was Father Miguel, the elderly priest who served Esperanza's small Catholic church. He was a man Daniel respected, one of the few people in town who seemed genuinely committed to helping others regardless of their race or background. "This is official business, Father," Wade said curtly. "Of course. But surely such serious accusations require careful consideration, not a public spectacle." Father Miguel's voice was gentle but firm. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation in my office, where we can examine the evidence properly." Daniel saw what the priest was doing, buying them time, removing them from the volatile public situation. It was a lifeline, and he grabbed it. "That sounds reasonable, Sheriff. We have nothing to hide." Wade looked frustrated, clearly preferring the intimidation value of a public confrontation. But refusing a priest's suggestion would alienate half the town, and he needed their cooperation more than he needed to flex his authority. "Fine, but nobody leaves town until this is sorted out." As they walked toward the church, Daniel caught Father Miguel's eye and saw understanding there. The priest knew exactly what he was doing, and more importantly, why he was doing it. Whatever happened next, they had bought themselves precious time to figure out how to escape the trap that was closing around them. But as Daniel looked at the hard faces surrounding them, he realized that time might be the only thing they had left. Father Miguel's office was a small, sparse room behind the chapel, furnished only with a simple wooden desk, 2 chairs and a crucifix on the whitewashed wall. The priest closed the door firmly behind them, then moved to pour water from a clay pitcher into 3 cups. "Drink," he said quietly, offering the cups to Daniel and Ahyoka. "You both look like you've been through hell." Sheriff Wade remained standing, his hand still resting on his weapon. "Father, I appreciate your concern, but this is a legal matter. I have a federal warrant." "You have a telegram," Father Miguel corrected gently. "A telegram from someone claiming to represent federal authority. Have you verified the authenticity of this communication, Sheriff?" Wade's eyes narrowed. "Are you questioning my judgment, Father? I'm questioning the wisdom of acting on unverified information in a matter of such gravity." The priest's voice remained calm, but Daniel detected steel beneath the gentleness. "Surely justice requires careful consideration, not hasty action." Daniel seized the opening. "Father Miguel is right, Sheriff. Anyone can send a telegram claiming to represent federal authority. If there's really a warrant for my wife's arrest, shouldn't you contact the territorial authorities to verify it?" "I don't need to verify anything," Wade snapped. "I know a wanted criminal when I see one." "Do you?" Ahyoka spoke for the first time since entering the office, her voice quiet but clear. "Tell me, Sheriff Wade, what crime am I supposed to have committed?" Wade's confidence faltered slightly. "Murder. Says here you killed a white family in Colorado." "When, where, what were their names?" Ahyoka's questions came rapid fire, delivered with the precision of someone who knew the accusation was false. "If I'm such a dangerous criminal, surely you have details about these alleged crimes." "The details don't matter. What matters is—" "The details matter very much," Father Miguel interrupted. "False accusations are a grave sin, Sheriff. If you're acting on incomplete information, you risk perpetrating a terrible injustice." Daniel watched the exchange with growing hope. Wade was clearly operating on orders from someone else, probably Morrison's associates, seeking revenge rather than legitimate legal authority. The sheriff's inability to provide specific details about the supposed crimes was telling. "Sheriff," Daniel said carefully, "I understand you're trying to do your job, but my wife and I have committed no crimes. We defended ourselves against attackers, which is our legal right. If you want to investigate that incident, I'm happy to cooperate, but this federal warrant business," he shrugged, "sounds like someone's trying to use you to settle a personal score." Wade's face flushed with anger. "Are you calling me corrupt, Harlow?" "I'm saying you might be getting used. The men who attacked our ranch weren't law-abiding citizens, Sheriff. They were slavers, kidnappers, murderers. If their associates are now claiming my wife is a federal fugitive—" Daniel let the implication hang in the air. Father Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "It would be a clever strategy, wouldn't it? Use legitimate authority to accomplish what violence could not." "This is ridiculous," Wade sputtered. "I have my orders." "From whom?" Ahyoka asked sharply. "Who gave you these orders, Sheriff?" The question clearly caught Wade off guard. For a moment he looked like a man who'd just realized he was standing in quicksand. That's official business." "No," Father Miguel said firmly. "That's the heart of the matter. If you're acting on federal authority, you should be proud to name your superior. If you're acting on private instructions..." He spread his hands. "Well, that raises very different questions." Daniel saw their chance and pressed the advantage. "Father, Sheriff Wade seems reluctant to discuss the source of his information. Perhaps we should contact the territorial marshal ourselves, ask him to clarify the situation." "Excellent idea," the priest agreed. "I can send a telegram immediately. The territorial marshal's office should be able to confirm whether there's actually a federal warrant for Mrs. Harlow's arrest." Wade's composure cracked completely. "Now wait just a minute. You can't just..." "Can't what, Sheriff? Can't verify the legitimacy of federal warrants. Can't ensure that justice is properly served." Father Miguel's voice carried the authority of decades spent confronting corruption and injustice. "I think the people of this community would expect nothing less from their elected officials." The sheriff looked trapped, his eyes darting between Daniel Ahyoka and the priest. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. "Fine, but these two don't leave town until we get confirmation. And if that warrant turns out to be real..." "If it's real, we'll cooperate fully," Daniel said. "But if it's not, I trust you'll investigate who's been feeding you false information." After Wade left muttering threats and promises under his breath, Father Miguel turned to his guests with a weary smile. "That bought you some time, but not much. Wade's not the real problem here. He's just a weak man being used by stronger, more dangerous people." "You know about Morrison," Ahyoka said. It wasn't a question. "I know that Jake Morrison and men like him have been operating in this territory for years, often with the tacit approval of corrupt officials. I also know that when such men are killed, their associates don't simply forget and move on." The priest's expression was grave. "You've made powerful enemies, my children, the kind who won't stop until they've extracted their pound of flesh." Daniel leaned forward in his chair. "Father, what do you know about the federal warrant? Is there any chance it's legitimate?" "Extremely unlikely. Federal warrants require extensive documentation, multiple witnesses' evidence of interstate crimes. What Wade described sounds like something cobbled together quickly by someone with limited resources but enough money to bribe a telegraph operator. So we have time to prove it's false, perhaps, but even if you discredit this particular warrant, there will be others. Men like Morrison's associates have long memories and patient hearts. They'll keep coming at you through legal channels, corrupt officials, hired guns, whatever it takes." Ahyoka spoke quietly. "Then we need to end this permanently, find the people behind the false warrant, and make sure they can't try again. That's a dangerous path, my child. Violence begets violence, corruption spreads like wildfire. Fight monsters too long, and you risk becoming one yourself." "What do you suggest we do?" Daniel asked. "Keep running for the rest of our lives." Father Miguel was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands clasped in prayer or contemplation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "There's a man in Santa Fe named Judge Harrison Porter, an honest man, which is rare enough in territorial politics. He's been building cases against corrupt officials, trying to clean up the legal system one crooked sheriff and bought judge at a time." The priest looked directly at Daniel. "If anyone can help you navigate this situation legally, it's him. And if legal solutions don't work, then you'll have to decide what kind of people you want to be, what kind of life you want to build together." Father Miguel's eyes were kind but serious. "But I'll tell you this, the happiest couples I've married are the ones who choose love over revenge, building over destroying, healing over hurting." Daniel felt Ahyoka's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own. The simple contact sent warmth through him, a reminder of what they were really fighting for. "Father," Ahyoka said suddenly, "would you marry us properly legally with all the documents Sheriff Wade wants to see?" The priest raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking for the right reasons? Marriage is a sacrament, not a legal convenience." "We're asking because we love each other," Daniel said firmly. "Because we want to build a life together, face whatever comes as partners. The legal protection is important, but it's not why we want to do this. And you understand the challenges you'll face. A mixed marriage in this territory will draw attention, hostility, constant questions about your legitimacy as a couple." "We've already faced those challenges," Ahyoka replied. "Getting married won't make them worse, and it might provide some legal protection against people like Sheriff Wade." Father Miguel smiled. "In that case, I'd be honored to perform the ceremony, but we should do it quickly before Wade returns with whatever reinforcements he's undoubtedly summoning." The wedding that followed was unlike anything Daniel had imagined. No white dress, no flowers, no gathered family and friends. Just a simple exchange of vows in the small chapel with Father Miguel officiating and two elderly parishioners serving as witnesses. But as Daniel looked into Ahyoka's eyes and spoke the words that would bind them together, he felt a rightness that had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with the woman standing beside him. She was no longer the desperate, broken figure he'd found in the desert. She was his partner, his equal, his chosen companion in whatever battles lay ahead. "Do you, Daniel Harlow, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." "Do you, Ahyoka, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Her voice was strong, certain, carrying none of the desperation that had marked their first meeting. "By the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Father Miguel's smile was radiant. "You may kiss the bride." The kiss was gentle, tentative, their first, and both were acutely aware of Ahyoka's history and the trauma she'd endured. But there was warmth in it, promise, the beginning of something neither had dared hope for just days before. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Harlow," Father Miguel said, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish. "May your union be blessed with love, understanding, and the strength to overcome whatever challenges await you." They were interrupted by the sound of multiple horses approaching the church at speed. Through the window, Daniel could see Sheriff Wade returning with 4 additional men, deputies or hired guns. It was impossible to tell which. "Time to go," Ahyoka murmured, already moving toward the back of the chapel, where Father Miguel had indicated there was another exit. "Wait," the priest said, pressing a sealed envelope into Daniel's hands. "Your marriage certificate and a letter of introduction to Judge Porter. Guard them with your lips. They may be the only thing standing between you and a noose." "Father, what about you? When Wade realizes you helped us?" "Let me worry about Sheriff Wade. I've been dealing with corrupt officials longer than you've been alive, my son." Father Miguel's smile was serene but determined. "Go. Build the life God intended for you. And remember, love is stronger than hate, truth more powerful than lies. Hold fast to that, and you'll find your way through whatever darkness awaits." They slipped out through the church's rear entrance just as Wade and his men were dismounting at the front. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel, escaping through a chapel, running from the law on their wedding day. If Sarah could see him now, would she approve of the choices he'd made? But as he helped Ahyoka onto her horse and they rode quietly toward the edge of town, Daniel realized he wasn't thinking about Sarah anymore. His past had become just that past. His future was riding beside him, facing whatever came next, with the same courage she'd shown in everything else. They were nearly clear of Esperanza when the pursuit began. Shouts erupted from the direction of the church, followed by the sound of horses being spurred into desperate speed. "They're coming," Ahyoka called, spurring her mount into a gallop. "I know. Head for the canyon trail. If we can reach the high country, we can lose them in the rocks." What followed was a desperate chase across broken terrain under the blazing afternoon sun. Wade and his men had superior numbers, but Daniel and Ahyoka had intimate knowledge of the land and horses that were already warmed up from their morning ride. The chase lasted for hours, a deadly game of cat and mouse through arroyos and mesas, across creek beds and over ridges that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. More than once, bullets whined past them as their pursuers closed the distance, only to fall back as the fugitives found another burst of speed or a more treacherous path that forced caution. It was near sunset when they finally lost their pursuers in a maze of slot canyons that opened onto a hidden valley Daniel remembered from his early days in the territory. They walked their exhausted horses into the shelter of some cottonwood trees and finally allowed themselves to rest. "Are you hurt?" Daniel asked, noting the way Ahyoka was favoring her left arm. "Just a graze. Bullet caught my sleeve but didn't do much damage." She examined the torn fabric with clinical detachment. "I'm fine, but our horses are nearly done in. We need to rest them before we can move on." As they tended to their mounts and shared the last of their water, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were now officially fugitives, wanted by territorial law enforcement and hunted by Morrison's associates. The comfortable illusion of building a peaceful life together had been shattered by the harsh realities of frontier justice. "Do you regret it?" Ahyoka asked quietly, as they shared a meager meal of hardtack and jerky. "Marrying me, I mean. You could have walked away from all this, left me to face whatever comes alone." "Never." Daniel's response was immediate and fierce. "Ahyoka, these past few days have been the first time since Sarah died that I've felt truly alive. Whatever happens next, whatever we have to face, I want to face it with you. Even if it means spending the rest of our lives running, never having a real home, children, the kind of life you planned with your first wife." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "The life I planned with Sarah was built on different dreams, different circumstances. This life, the one we're building together, it's not what I expected, but it's what I choose. And if we die tomorrow, if Wade catches us or Morrison's friends, or if we just run out of luck in this God-forsaken country, then we die together as husband and wife, having chosen our own path instead of letting others choose for us." Daniel reached for her hand, noting how she no longer flinched at his touch. "Ahyoka, I've spent 3 years existing without living. You've shown me the difference." She leaned against him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she seemed to truly relax. The warrior's alertness was still there, but underneath it was something softer. Trust maybe, or just the simple human need for comfort. "My grandmother used to say that some people are born to quiet lives and others are born to make noise," she said softly. "I think we were both born to make noise." "Then let's make sure it's the right kind of noise, the kind that helps people instead of just creating more violence." They spent the night taking turns on watch, listening for sounds of pursuit that never came. At dawn, they broke camp and began the long journey toward Santa Fe, where Judge Porter might offer them legal protection or at least honest answers about their situation. The ride took 3 days through increasingly dangerous territory. They avoided main roads and established settlements, relying on Ahyoka's knowledge of Apache trails and Daniel's experience with the land. Twice they encountered travelers, a family of settlers, heading west, a group of Mexican traders moving north, but both meetings passed without incident. It was on the 3rd morning that they finally saw the adobe buildings and church spires of Santa Fe rising from the high desert like a mirage made real. The territorial capital was larger than anywhere either of them had been, a cosmopolitan mixture of Mexican, Anglo, and Indian cultures that had somehow learned to coexist in relative peace. "It's beautiful," Ahyoka breathed, looking down at the city from their vantage point on a nearby hill. "And dangerous," Daniel reminded her. "If there really is a federal warrant out for your arrest, this is where it would be processed. We need to be very careful about who we trust." They approached the city, cautiously entering through a warren of side streets that kept them away from the main plazas where law enforcement might be concentrated. Following Father Miguel's directions, they found Judge Porter's office in a modest building near the courthouse. The judge himself was a surprise younger than Daniel had expected, with intelligent brown eyes and an air of quiet competence. He listened to their story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a piece of paper. "Father Miguel was right to send you to me," he said when they finished. "This federal warrant business is almost certainly fabricated. I've seen similar cases, corrupt officials using false documents to pursue personal vendettas or settle old scores. Can you help us prove it's false?" Daniel asked. "I can do better than that. I can tell you who's behind it." Judge Porter opened a thick file folder. "Jake Morrison's death has created something of a power vacuum in the slave trade. Several groups are competing to take over his territory and his contacts. One of them is a man named Colonel James Blackwood, former military officer, current criminal mastermind." "How do you know about Blackwood?" Ahyoka asked. "Because I've been building a case against him for 2 years. Morrison was one of his key operatives, and his death has forced Blackwood into the open. He's been putting pressure on local officials, calling in favors, trying to eliminate anyone who might threaten his organization." Daniel felt pieces clicking into place. So the federal warrant is Blackwood's way of using the legal system to accomplish what Morrison's guns couldn't. Very clever, actually. If he can have you arrested on federal charges, you disappear into the system. Even if the charges are eventually dropped, the process could take months or years. "What do you recommend we do?" Judge Porter leaned back in his chair, studying them both carefully. "Officially, I have to advise you to surrender to federal authorities and trust in the legal system. Unofficially," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "Blackwood has killed witnesses before, good people who were trying to do the right thing. The legal system only works when both sides play by the rules. And Blackwood doesn't play by the rules," Ahyoka said. "Colonel Blackwood plays by one rule: win at all costs. He's spent years building a network of corrupt officials, compliant judges, and intimidated witnesses. Taking him down through normal legal channels would require evidence we don't have and witnesses who are too scared to testify." Daniel saw where this was heading. "You want us to help you build a case against him." "I want you to help me destroy him," Judge Porter said bluntly. "Legally, systematically, but completely. Blackwood's organization is a cancer on this territory. Every day he operates, more innocent people suffer. That sounds dangerous for people who are already fugitives. Everything is dangerous for you now, but this way at least your danger serves a purpose." The judge leaned forward. "I can't promise you'll survive this, but I can promise that if we succeed, Blackwood's slave trade dies with him. No more Elizabeth Hutchins, no more families destroyed, no more women sold like cattle." Daniel looked at Ahyoka, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her dark eyes. They could run, keep running until they found some remote corner of the world where Blackwood's reach couldn't follow, or they could fight, take the battle to their enemies instead of waiting for the next attack. "What would you need from us?" Ahyoka asked. "Information, access to Blackwood's operations, evidence that would stand up in an honest court." Judge Porter's expression was grim, and probably eventually testimony from people who've survived his slave roots. People like me, people like you, but also people like Daniel, witnesses to Morrison's crime, survivors of attacks, anyone willing to stand up and tell the truth about what's happening in our territory. Daniel made his decision. "What's our first step?" "First, we need to neutralize the immediate threat. The federal warrant is being processed through a corrupt marshal named Thompson. If we can expose Thompson's corruption and invalidate the warrant, we buy ourselves time to go after Blackwood. Ahyoka finished. Exactly. But it won't be easy. Thompson has been very careful to cover his tracks, and he has powerful friends protecting him. Then we'll have to be more careful than he is, Daniel said, and find more powerful friends. Judge Porter smiled for the first time since they'd entered his office. I was hoping you'd say that, because I think I know just the people to help us. As the sun set over Santa Fe, Daniel and Ahyoka found themselves committed to a path that would either destroy their enemies or destroy them. But sitting in Judge Porter's office planning their next moves, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. A sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. They were no longer just running from their past. They were building a future not just for themselves, but for all the Elizabeth Hutchins who might yet be saved. It was dangerous work, but it was work worth doing, and they would do it together as husband and wife partners in every sense of the word. Whatever came next, they would face it with courage, love, and the quiet strength of two souls who had chosen each other against impossible odds. The real battle was just beginning. But for the first time since this all started, Daniel Harlow believed they might actually win.